Let's take a look at some photographs. What do you think is happening here? The pictures show serene people against an open, sky-filled landscape. A young farmer smiles as he shows off two enormous, leafy cabbages. A nurse in a starched uniform displays a newborn baby to its mother through the nursery window, then relaxes over a game of bridge with her colleagues. A girl happily plays volleyball. Young women practice calisthenics in orderly rows. A couple relaxes in their room reading. A crowd of all ages watches a baseball game. A smiling man arrives at a Christian church service. This doesn't look so bad, right? The setting of these photographs is Manzanar, one of the 10 relocation camps the U.S. government set up to house Japanese Americans during World War II. More than 2/3 of them were American citizens. Many of them left behind thriving businesses and considerable wealth in cities like San Francisco. Whole families were rounded up and bused to incarceration centers. When they arrived at their destinations, what did they find? According to these images, a dignified and vibrant community in a pristine Spartan landscape. So, who is the witness to this scene and the author of these images? I'll give you a hint. And another hint. Here's one more. You can find his work in any large chain bookstore or at the calendar kiosk at the mall. Known for his breathtaking Western landscape photography, Ansel Adams created this series of photos of Manzanar for the U.S. government in 1943. At that time, there was very little protest from anyone at all about the confinement of 112,000 Japanese Americans in barracks far from their homes. The prisoners were surrounded by watchtowers and guards with guns and searchlights. Many now identify this as the worst violation of human rights in the United States since slavery. So why was there so little protest at the time? There was a climate of fear following the attack on Pearl Harbor and the official American entry into World War II. Military leaders convinced President Franklin Roosevelt that a Japanese attack on the West Coast was imminent. They also convinced him that the Japanese American residents on the West Coast represented an internal threat as possible collaborators or spies whose loyalty to the United States could not be taken for granted. One Los Angeles Times editorial read, for example, "A viper is nonetheless a viper wherever the egg is hatched, so a Japanese American, born of Japanese parents, grows up to be Japanese, not an American." We can wonder whether the whole process might have been derailed if not for the consent and participation of the American public, particularly the press. So I hope this video will get you thinking about the deliberate effort to portray internment and camp life as more pleasant than it actually was. Adams was already a famous photographer of the West when he took the series of photos at Manzanar. Still, he was subject to a number of restrictions placed on any photographer at any relocation center. Watchtowers and barbed wire were not to be photographed, nor were guards. Photographers were discouraged from talking with prisoners, and prisoners were encouraged to smile for the cameras. Incidentally, the series of photographs at Manzanar are Adams' only foray into documentary photography. While I'm reading these photographs as an effort to whitewash internment, Adams explained in 1965 that this was not his intention. He said, "The purpose of my work was to show how these people, suffering under a great injustice and loss of property, business, and professions, had overcome the sense of defeat and despair by building for themselves a vital community in an arid but magnificent environment." We can certainly see the Japanese Americans depicted in the photos as demonstrating resilience, obedience, and loyalty to the American government by bearing the hardship of internment. This was the intention of the American government when they hired Adams to take the photos. In fact, many of the Japanese interned volunteered for the army or purchased war bonds while they were confined to the camps. One aim of the public relations campaign was to show the belligerent Japanese government in Tokyo that Japanese American citizens were happily serving the United States and that they were being treated well. We know how the internment story ends. Some prisoners were confined to the camps for as long as 4 years. Internment is now viewed with dismay and embarrassment. The United States apologized and offered financial reparations to the families. But there is some evidence that the United States has attempted to hide the details of its transgressions. For 50 years, the government impounded some 800 photographs by yet another famous American photographer who you probably recognize. Dorothea Lange is known for her emotional photos of poor migrants during the Depression, including this iconic image. The War Relocation Authority, the agency overseeing Japanese internment, hired Lange, but later refused to allow the public to see her work. Her photos tell a much different story than Adams's. She shows the dehumanizing process of waiting in long lines to be given a number and shuffled off to destinations unknown. Infants and the elderly huddled with families. Men and women carried what possessions they could bring. Lange shows the crowded and dispirited condition of camp residents, whose privacy was basically non-existent. Former horse stalls were converted into barracks. Hospital beds were placed outdoors next to latrines. School children knelt at their lessons on hard wooden floors. The dead were honored with makeshift memorials. These photos, and hundreds of others by Lange, were not rediscovered in the National Archives until 2006. They help explain this extraordinary moment in American history when a significant group of American citizens had their rights stripped and their property confiscated.